Good evening and welcome back to the show. Now, Ambassador Sim, what are some of the major trade areas between EU and Fiji?
It's very interesting that you mentioned that because actually I looked into the figures very recently and I realized the trade between the European Union and the Pacific is, as far as the exports from the Pacific to the European Union are concerned, mainly composed of commodities, which means that the European market is a very good market for exports of commodities from the Pacific. Let me take a few examples. Sugar, for example, you know that sugar is a big export for Fiji. One fifth to 1/4, 20 to 25% of the sugar exported from Fiji goes to the European Union. Another example that I touched upon already, fish, which is the number one export for most of the countries in the Pacific. The European market is the single largest importer of Pacific fish. A third example, but that doesn't distinguish the European Union from the rest of the world. Fiji water is a very recognized brand globally, and of course it is also very much exported to the European Union. Looking at the other side, what the European Union exports to Fiji, well, we export mainly equipment and machinery. So the most recognizable products would be, for example, the Airbus, which was just recently acquired by Fiji Airways. But more unknown for people, you enrolled recently a new passport for Fiji. The equipment producing these passports is from Germany, or the bottling equipment at Fiji Water comes from France.
Thank you for that detailed explanation, Ambassador Sim. Now, Director Khan, economic recovery is a top agenda for many Pacific Island countries. How is PIFS prepared to meet the economies of these Pacific Island countries in this recovery phase?
I think that's a very good question. As I was mentioning a bit earlier, one of the priorities for the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat would be to build the resilience of our Pacific economies to ensure that they're better prepared for future shocks such as this. And one key area of work that we will be pursuing as a priority under the Spirit project is the development of a Pacific regional e-commerce strategy and roadmap. The reason we want to do that is if you look at how the developed countries in the world responded to COVID-19, most of these countries were able to go online and ensure that e-commerce was still operating. There were delivery of parcels and other packages, but we weren't able to do a similar thing in the Pacific region, primarily because we don't have the infrastructure, the policies, and the right environment at the moment to pursue that. And so one of the key aspects would be to ensure that we can have this strategy and e-commerce roadmap in place so that we can support our member states to ensure that they can build online payment systems, to ensure that they can trade more online, as that's the way of the future.
So there's a need for governments in the Pacific to be confident in e-commerce given the current situation that COVID-19 has introduced us to. How will you be able to ensure that Pacific Island countries' governments are confident in the idea of e-commerce?
So that's a very good question. We are hosting a trade finance symposium in a couple of months in March. What we're hoping to do is work with the commercial banks, the central banks in the region, and other stakeholders to address the primary barrier at the moment, which is payment systems. So ensuring that our MSMEs in the Pacific region and in Fiji in particular are able to access something we call the online payment gateway, which is actually the shopping cart feature that you experience on our website when you're buying goods and services. And so those simple services are not accessible at the moment to MSMEs. They have to pay a security deposit between $30,000 to $40,000 to commercial banks to access that. So a project of this nature under the Spirit project would help a lot of these MSMEs to try and overcome these barriers and trade online.
Thank you for that, Director Khan. Now, Ambassador Sim, does EPA offer potential export for products like kava, coffee, ginger, and etc. to be exported to the EU markets?
Well, the rules for exports on the EU market are either harmonized at the European level, which means that they are decided by the European institutions and they are valid for the whole market, or sometimes, for few items, they are still the responsibility of member states, which leads to discrepancies between member states in the technical rules and specifications for imports of products on the European market. For some of the products you described, coffee, ginger, there is absolutely no difficulty. The rules are harmonized and it can be already today freely exported to the European market. For kava, it's a little bit more of a sensitive issue because member states in the European Union retain their capacity to regulate the imports of kava. And this is one of the areas actually where the economic integration of the European Union is not achieved yet, and it would be much easier to agree on coordinated and harmonized rule for import of kava in the European Union. But for that, of course, we need more interest from the member states.
Thank you for that, Ambassador Sim. Now, where can local businesses who want to do business with EU go for guidance?
Well, there are two ways to look at it. The most obvious way would be for them to come to my delegation so that we give them the information. But this is not the most practical way. We're in Fiji, and we do not have antennas in the other Pacific Island countries. This is the reason why a project such as the Spirit project to strengthen Pacific intra-regional and international trade is very important. Because as a part of this project, we will strengthen the capacity of the trade bodies in the Pacific Island countries themselves, so that when you have a producer and a potential exporter, let's say in Kiribati or Tuvalu or Nauru, they don't come and knock on my door here in Suva, but they can ask their own authorities, and they will be empowered and their capacity will be built so that they can provide the answers to this type of questions. So it's really for us a matter of developing a network of local trade points.
Thank you for that, Ambassador Sim. Now, Director Khan, how much has the COVID-19, from PIFS perspective, what are some major what are some major recovery challenges that economies in the region are bound to face?
I think the most obvious one is due to the closure of borders. A lot of the tourism-dependent economies in the Pacific have been very severely impacted, Fiji included. And so everyone's looking forward to the gradual opening up of borders so that Fiji and other countries can begin to welcome these visitors. But in order to reach that point, we have to support countries when it comes to having the relevant infrastructure on the ground, when it comes to testing, when it comes to contact tracing, and some of these other requirements. And so the Forum Economic Ministers and the Foreign Affairs Ministers have formed something called the COVID-19 Economic Recovery Task Force. And so this comprises the Permanent Secretaries of Finance for a number of our member states. They will be meeting in a couple of weeks to actually discuss this very issue on how the Pacific can either work towards an intra-regional bubble between the Pacific countries themselves, and also how we can involve Australia and New Zealand as well. And so this is an ongoing discussion at the moment. The other severe area has been the level of indebtedness. So a lot of the Pacific Island countries have had to borrow significant sums of money when it comes to stimulating their economies to ensure that they can pay the wages of a number of workers and to actually keep the economy going. And so the pain, unfortunately, amongst our member states will be felt now into the immediate future. And this is something that we are trying to work with them very closely to try and mitigate. And so a project like Spirit, for example, which is a grant-based project from the European Union, ensures that we can provide this assistance without increasing the level of debt that the countries are in. So we welcome forms of assistance such as this.
Thank you for that, Director Khan. And finally, Ambassador Sim, how much has the COVID-19 pandemic affected trade with Fiji and the EU?
Well, I think the main purpose of trade in a situation like COVID-19 is to offer alternative sources for creation of job growth and income. For a country like Fiji, which is very dependent upon tourism, at a time when international borders are closed and international tourists do not longer come to the country, it is extremely important to provide these new opportunities for job, income and growth for the country. When we look at the commerce between the European Union and Fiji, I would say that the effect will be in favor of Fiji. Because on the one hand, let's consider the products which are exported from Fiji. Sugar, water, fish. The European consumers won't stop drinking water, eating sugar and eating fish. So the level of these exports will remain. On the other hand, of course, with the current economic circumstances, I think we won't sell any Airbus aircraft anytime soon to Fiji. But I hope better days will come, and this is the reason why we have to foster the opportunities offered by international trade and intra-regional trade within the region, so that people will have a chance to get back on their feet and start again buying the high-value items that contribute to the growth of this country.
Thank you for that, Ambassador Sim, and thank you both for coming on the show. Before we wrap up, any other final thoughts from you both? We'll start with you, Ambassador Sim.
Well, thank you for having me on Talk Business. It's very good that I get a chance to show another face of the European Union, not only as a supporter for democracy and human rights or for a development partner, but also as a business, trade and economic partner for the Pacific and for Fiji. So, Vinaka Vakalevu.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you as well on behalf of the Secretary General of the Pacific Islands Forum, and as well as to the EU delegation for their support in ensuring that an important project of this nature is now off the ground. And I think the focus for the Forum Secretariat now is ensuring that we can implement this project as soon as possible so that member states can begin to benefit from it, particularly in the current environment that we're in. So thank you once again, Vinaka.
Thank you so much, Director Khan and Ambassador Sim.
Naka.
And that's all from Ambassador Sim, Director Khan and I here on Talk Business. For feedbacks or comments, remember you can always send us an email at news@fijitv.com.fj or give us a call on 330-5100. Until next week Tuesday, have a productive week ahead and good night.